Hi, I'm John,
And I'm Jeff.
and welcome to Love and Other Investments. Our episode today, we're going to talk about a financial breach of trust. That time when you suddenly find yourself quite angry or hurt because of something that your other partner has done financially that, quite frankly, has done you dirty,
Done you wrong?
done you wrong. And now you're trying to figure out
Is this like it's like an affair? Is that what you're saying? Like a financial affair?
financially cheating. I mean, it can feel that way.
Oh, I'm sure.
I mean, it can be pretty intense.
But give us an example.
Well, you know, you're let's say you're the person who typically takes care of the finances.
Yeah.
You have a normal ebb and flow of money in and money out. And you get to the end of the month and you know that there should be X amount of dollars in the checking account. And you go look and it's suddenly a much smaller amount.
Yeah.
Or you open up your savings, you open up your app to check your savings balance, and you know there used to be $8,000 in there and now there's $1,500. And your first reaction is, "Oh no, my account's been hacked." Come to find out,
By your partner?
it was by your partner.
Ouch.
Ouch. You know, so it can be that way. It can be on the discovery of money that has been spent. And remember, we've said this before, once you spend it, it's gone. You don't get to spend it twice.
Right.
And so there's a sense of immediate loss.
But I like the one you were kind of headed there. I like the one where you're the one in charge of the money and there's $1,000 left over at the end of the month and you think it's yours to spend. And then your partner maybe doesn't realize that until much later.
And they spent it.
And they spent it, or they didn't, and they just think, oh, you just bought yourself a new toy and didn't talk to me about it.
Right. You know, and it can happen not just on the income side, it can happen on the expense side. You know, we kind of get in rhythms. You know how much your MasterCard bill is roughly every month, how much you guys put on the credit app every month. And suddenly one month it's huge. So you go scanning really quickly through the statement and there's a big number in there that you don't know what it is. And, maybe hope against hope, you're saying, hopefully somebody just frauded our account and American Express will refund this back promptly. And you hear from the other end of the room, oh no, nope, that was me.
Oops.
So, these are kind of the more typical trust breaches that we would see. But there's also the big ones.
The gambling ones.
The gambling, and it can come from lots of disorders or addictions that we could talk about. But these are times where, legitimately you've got somebody who's in a destructive pattern that could really break the safety of the family.
Sure.
And, those are terrible things to go through. And maybe someday we're going to do kind of an episode on how to triage some of those things. But I think what we're going to focus on today is maybe put this in the category of sometimes little things turn into big things. Because I think that's the more common experience.
Yeah. So tell us what you mean, because I think you have a specific thing in mind.
Well, again, we find ourselves feeling a certain entitlement to do things the way that we've done them in the past. And, maybe it's a lot of little things. Maybe it's a bunch of trips to Starbucks. Maybe it's a bunch of trips to the sporting goods store. Maybe it's, a bunch of trips for pedicures and other things. But we're doing them because, hey, life has been really stressful recently. I need to spend extra time with my girlfriends or whatever it is. There's something going on, and you are now consuming more money on a monthly basis than what you and your partner were used to you consuming. And individually, those little transactions don't seem to make a big deal out of it. But come the end of the month, when it adds up, all of a sudden you find yourself, if you're the person doing the spending, you find yourself on the wrong end of a very hard argument over the last purchase that you made.
Yeah, and I think you were sort of implying that sometimes these resentments can be over small purchases. So maybe there will be a kind of lack of conversation about these purchases, and then they sort of, the resentment builds up, over some period of time, and then that one Starbucks run, that costs $6 or whatever it was, is the straw that breaks the camel's back, and suddenly there's this outpouring of anger or frustration or accusation or whatever it is, that the other one has been spending too much money and they should stop going to Starbucks, when in fact it's not just the Starbucks, right? It's the Starbucks plus 20 other purchases that have been not discussed.
Right. And of course, if you're on the receiving end of that, you go, I can't believe this. You must be having a bad day because you are ripping me over $6.
Right.
And so you're the problem.
Right.
You're irrational, unreasonable.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk
petty.
about this with you. Yeah.
Yeah. When, a lot of times how we argue, you might, I don't know, as a marriage and family therapist, do you think it's important how we argue?
Of course. What would you have done if I had said, no, it's not important? Yes.
So, I think part of this starts off with, how do we get used to communicating about what the real problem is?
Right. How do you change how you communicate or what you communicate about, or your attitude about the other, in order to make the conflict that has arisen, reasonably resolvable?
Yeah. So I want to get into some specifics, because one of the things that Jeff and I talked about as we were kind of prepping for this episode is everybody's experience is going to be unique to them. So there is no one Band-Aid that we can give you on the concept of financial, breach of trust, because your breach of trust is going to be inherently different than anyone else's.
Yeah.
And you and your spouse are unique individuals that come from unique backgrounds. And the recipe for building this conflict probably didn't happen overnight.
No.
And it probably finally just simmered over to the point, or boiled over to the point, that it's gone from small, even cute, to annoying, to now, wow, how did we get to where we're seriously arguing about all of these things? Like, I don't know you, and you don't respect me, and you're going to wreck us.
Yeah.
And you're going,
or even the whoa. I'm done. That's sometimes I'll hear that one. I'm done. Right. I'm done. Meaning the relationship is over.
I can't trust you. All of these things that have built from a period of small annoyances to big breach.
Right.
So one of the things that Jeff and I always talk about, and repeating things isn't a bad idea here, is we have got to, as couples, especially over the years, we've got to work our way to being on the same page together.
Yes.
So we have a certain amount of resources, we have a certain amount of obligations, and we have things that we need to understand that we have prioritized together. So obviously, if we're having a significant argument, and if trust is now on the table, I can trust you or I can't trust you. If trust is on the table, which is pretty central to a relationship, then there's something going on in how we're utilizing our shared resources that is driving a wedge between two people.
Right. And I think I would argue that before you attempt to solve the problem of dollars, that's the math problem that stirred up this whole argument that someone might have had, right? That you have to repair the trust.
Mm-hmm.
That the emotional component of the thing is more important than the pragmatic for the time being.
Yeah.
It's necessary to tackle that first.
Yeah, if you start trying to rebuild things with, okay, we're going to work on this, but you need to know I will never trust anything you say.
Yeah, you're not going forward.
Yeah. So one of the things that I encourage people to take a look at is starting to examine what are the transactions, what are the purchases that are bothering the other person. So literally an accounting of what are these things that we're looking at, making sure, and the other person needs to be willing to see those transactions, not defensively, but just this is the stuff that's bugging
Just
the other
matter of
person.
fact. It's just matter of
Yeah.
fact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I'm leaving my shoes in the living room, and my wife says, it's really annoying to me that you're leaving your shoes in the living room, I at least know what it is that's bugging her.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
But, if she says, well, you just do things that bother me, we're not getting
specific.
Anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we need to be specific about what it is that is causing the financial stress from a transactional standpoint. You need to, if you're the person making those transactions, you need to be able to hear them. And if you're the person presenting those transactions, the next phase that I think you've got to go through is to have an opportunity for the other person to explain why those transactions are important to them.
I mean, you're asking, so you're asking for them to come to a conversation about what it means.
Yes.
Okay.
If you're going to Starbucks 2 or 3 times a day, it's not just that you like Starbucks.
It's something else.
There's something else, why is, because you can drink a glass of water, you can have coffee at the office, you can, what is it? Does that?
Yeah, you can make your own coffee that's maybe even better than Starbucks.
Yeah.
And cheaper.
Sure. So there's something about going there that makes you feel a certain way, or maybe you're escaping a certain thing and that's the place that you escape to. And it would look really weird for you to walk in there and not walk out with something.
Right. But you're pointing to an idea that you and I discussed before we started, which is that perhaps in this particular example of Starbucks, right, perhaps there's a kind of medication being applied to the circumstance.
You realize that Starbucks is not going to send us any gift cards for this episode.
Yeah, well, that's okay. I actually don't drink coffee, so it's working out for me.
But go ahead.
Yeah. So but just to this specific example, you're sort of implying, I think, or I'm inferring that perhaps one meaning of those particular purchases could be that there's a kind of medication being applied to a feeling or an unwanted feeling or an unwanted circumstance. And therefore, it's not just, a cup of coffee. It's an antidote to something.
Yeah, and those could be, and the list could be endless, right? We could be talking about, pedicures or massages. We could be talking about shoes or
golf
clothing
clubs.
Or, weekends or time with friends,
right.
Or,
right, stuff, there's tools for the garage.
Yeah, whatever your hobby is that money's being spent on.
Right.
The list is, and that's why it's important to understand that each couple that's going through this current set of arguments is going to be dealing with their own unique set of circumstances. But once we can, part one, identify which actual transactions are creating stress for one person, the next step might be to have an opportunity to kind of explore why those transactions are important. What is it that you get by spending that money and buying that thing or that service?
And I want to add a kind of pro tip here. So when you get to this spot and you're having a conversation about what that thing means to them, the purchase means to them, I think it's really important to be open to the possibility that it could have more than one meaning or more than one purpose. On the surface, the purpose is, in the example we're using with Starbucks, which is just to get coffee, right? That's the surface level function of that purchase. And maybe one layer in, it's a kind of soothing, right? It's warm and it causes me to feel a certain way, and I didn't like how I was feeling before, so I'm medicating myself with it in some way. But we might find that there are other meanings as well. I needed to get out of the office because, my boss was yelling at me, or I'm trying to avoid some difficult circumstance that I'm in and can't talk about. Or, that's also an infinite number of possibilities, right? But just the pro tip is when you get to the discussion of what does this mean to you, remember that it's probably not just one meaning.
Sure. Can I do something really dumb?
Please.
So let's take this. Let's take a story here that has absolutely nothing to do with finances to kind of make our point.
Okay.
So let's say that when you unload the dishwasher and you're putting the silverware away, you think it's funny to put one fork in the spoon holder.
Okay.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And your wife at the beginning thinks it's kind of cute. And as the years roll on, it makes her more and more angry that you keep doing this.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, you and I know this is funny and it's pointless, and
it's a little prank.
It's a little prank, and in fact, this is not there. This is a fully made up story. We're not buying into
You're not doing this at home. Is that what you're saying? You're not confessing?
No, I promise. I'm making this up. But there literally could be a moment where you get this fork thrown at you out of anger,
frustration, right?
Yeah.
Like, stop messing with me.
Right.
It was funny the first time, but not the 1,000th.
Right. Now, any good-willed, rational male who's been putting a fork in the spoon drawer would say, maybe I've pushed this a little too far, and would stop.
That's
right?
not gender specific, though. That Eddie,
No.
Right? Okay.
But you see my point.
Right.
Hey, if this makes her really mad, I thought it was funny. It was enjoyable to me, but I'm going to stop doing this. Right.
Yeah.
But if we're back to our Starbucks or whatever the thing is,
right,
and I've got somebody angry with me, and yet I don't go, oh, well, that's annoying to this person. This is causing frustration and stress in our relationship. I'll just stop doing it. If you find yourself going, I don't want to stop, or I can't stop, or I feel compelled, or I feel, what might be another feeling that you have is I feel constrained that you won't let me do this anymore.
Yeah, like trapped.
Would you say that those would be some pretty good indicators that there's something to find out?
For sure.
Can you help? I'm a
Figure it
rookie.
out?
I'm a rookie. But could you talk about why it might be that I might next week stick that fork back in the spoon drawer?
I mean, there's 1,000 reasons, right? Like we'd have to know what was going on, but for a specific person. But in that scenario that you're describing, there's that if you continue to put the fork in the spoon spot, then I would say this is an expression of some aggression. If after it really bothers your wife, she's angry about it, she's hurt about it, it's done, she is so ready to be over that little joke, it's not funny anymore, and you keep doing it, this is an aggression. There could be lots of reasons why people might do that. For instance, they may feel as if some other part of their life is being controlled, or they're being hurt in some way, and this is their pathway to express it without being direct.
So before we open up Pandora's box here,
right,
and talk about all the reasons that all of us as human beings are nuttier than fruitcake,
right,
let's just take this moment to say, this is the point of why we want to talk about this talk in this episode about this trust issue, this breach issue, is because sometimes a spoon or a fork isn't just a fork.
That's right.
And we want to believe that a trip to Starbucks is just because I want a Starbucks.
Right.
And we aren't typically curious enough to realize that when something is creating stress in a relationship, that there's some things that we need to explore together.
Right.
And I need to be open in communicating and recognize that I may not even fully grasp why this is important to me. But I can probably grasp the idea that if we're arguing over something stupid, then there's something bigger going on that would be worth figuring out together.
Sure. And in the situation you're describing, where there's an explicit and intentional act of aggression, even if it's small, I'm not talking about hitting someone, just, the fork in the wrong spot. It's time. It's time to go to therapy. You would need to have such a huge change in attitude to work that out with your partner, that it would be really tough to do on your own.
Right.
That said, I think it's really critical that if you want to make that kind of a change, you're trying to understand what's going on in a situation. There's been a breach of trust and you're trying to figure it out. I think there's some basic principles that we often discuss. You need to be open. That means whatever your partner's perspective of you is not something to immediately deny or dismiss or defend against. Whatever they're saying about you might have a kernel of truth in it. It's probably smart to figure out what that means to them.
Mm-hmm.
The second is to function from a place of, giving the benefit of the doubt. Just because they have a critique of you or criticism of you doesn't mean that they hate all of you. They might hate you once in a while. They might even hate you right now.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that they have jettisoned the relationship and they want to get rid of you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important, for us to be open to the critique and to give them the benefit of the doubt. I think the third would be to behave with kindness. Assume, having given the benefit of the doubt, that the best move forward is not with a heated exchange. When your emotions come to a spot that they become overwhelming to you, the chance of resolving any conflict plummets. So it's really important to find a space of calmness in order to resolve especially serious issues. And I think lastly, it's extremely important that we have empathy for our partners. Like I've said before, and I'll say 1,000 times again, I'm sure, our own experience is important and we shouldn't just let it go. It's important for the relationship, but it's also important to understand the experience your partner has from their vantage point, not from an attitude or space where you're arguing with them, but rather seeing it through their eyes. And when you can do that, it doesn't mean you have to let go of your own perspective. You don't have to adopt you don't even have to agree with their perspective. You have to understand their perspective and assume that they're coming to that honestly, with some kind of reaction that's born out of their experience in life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think at that point we're at a spot where we're sort of opening up to the possibility of actually getting to some meaningful change. Now the specifics for a certain person's circumstance might dictate particular directions that we can't possibly explore here. Right?
Absolutely. And I think you've said lots of different things, but I think you could probably couch them all or wrap them all up in the idea of what love in a relationship
For sure.
really looks like.
For sure.
And I know, early in a relationship, when you're dating, when you're courting, when you're, freshly married, you're trying to figure out how not to annoy this other person because they have decided to love you, which is wonderful and it's great. And you want more of that.
Right.
And at some point in the relationship, you kind of get down to just being you. In some ways that's you with all of your baggage. It's exhausting to hide it all the time, right? And so as we become more comfortable with each other, we tend to be a little bit more ourselves, warts and all.
Yeah.
But
which is good.
Yeah, which is good. But in a loving relationship, we learn to work through that together.
Yeah.
And, realize that, do I love my spouse more than I love my hobby? Do I love my spouse more than I love a Starbucks?
Right.
Do I love a pedicure? And, the answer needs to be yes. That doesn't mean that solves all your problems by saying yes.
Right.
But it does set the stage. It sets the conditions by which you're going to be curious and say, hey, we have something that I'm struggling letting go of this, and it's causing you pain and frustration, and we're not meeting our goals financially. We need to work this out together, whether that involves me and /us getting somebody to help us do that, or whether it just, quite frankly, is us together being curious about why
And
I seem to not want to let go of this.
Yeah, doing the hard work.
And doing the hard work.
Right.
So a breach of trust really, I think in a lot of ways is, I don't want to call it an opportunity, but it's a moment where the flag goes up and you have to say to yourselves, hey, we love each other. We've made a commitment to work through this. Something has exposed itself, and we need to research it. We need to find out what it is, and we need to do it together in a trusting, exploring way that comes to a solution that's beneficial for both.
You got to invest the time and the energy and the attitude.
Yeah, and don't put forks in the spoon.
Yeah, you're not saying that from experience, though.
No, I've never done that, but now I'm suddenly wondering how that would go at home. So
I'm pretty sure you know how it would go.
I'll check back in a couple of weeks and let you know if I'm still alive.
All right, sounds good. All right, everyone, thanks for joining us. So we'll see you next time.
All right.